While the coronavirus pandemic continues to wreak havoc globally, the 21-day lockdown in India to control the spread of the virus has been extended by another 19 days till 3rd of May. Many of the restrictions imposed in the first phase of the lockdown will remain in force in the second phase as well. But to limit the impact on the economy, the government has allowed some sectors to resume their activities partially. The Ministry of Home Affairs issued a set of guidelines on 15th of April detailing some relaxations that would be allowed from 20th of April. What do these guidelines really mean, and what impact will these interim measures have on the key sectors of the economy? Let's take a deep dive with AGRI to understand. What do the lockdown guidelines tell us about the government's plan for tackling the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, when the economic lockdown was imposed on the whole country on the night of March 24, it was very clear then that this lockdown must also have an exit plan. Any such lockdown has to be withdrawn in a manner so that the gains that you thought had secured through the lockdown are sustained. The danger of a lockdown is if you lift the lockdown in one go, then the benefits that you thought you had gained for the system, for the health system, for controlling the spread of the virus, they may be frittered away. So while the Prime Minister talked about an extension of the lockdown till 3rd of May, the guidelines actually reveal the government's plan for a phased and staggered lifting of the lockdown. So the central message of the guidelines is to lay down a roadmap in which you will see the lockdown to be lifted gradually and in a phased manner, and keeping in mind the areas where the disease has spread at an alarming rate, what are called the hotspots, what are called the containment zones. So the relaxation will largely take place in areas where the containment has been fairly successful. That's one. The second message that I see from this is that a large segment of the rural economy has been given a lot of relaxation in terms of the lockdown. There was this view earlier that the rural economy has been hit very hard. So whether it is agricultural activity or whether it is industrial units in rural India that have got the benefit. The third broad message that I get from these guidelines is that the states had given a lot of suggestions to the center on how the lockdown should be extended. I think the center has followed a middle path, while the center has accepted the broad message that the lockdown must be extended, but at the same time it has laid out a plan for a phased lifting or relaxation of the lockdown, but in consultation and the enforcement in consultation with the states, and the enforcement responsibility is largely left with the state government.
What provisions do the guidelines make for the agriculture sector?
Well, even before when the lockdown guidelines were announced, agricultural activities were spared from the impact of the lockdown. But unfortunately, the enforcement agencies did not pay heed to the guidelines, which clearly exempted farm work, field work, even the mandi work to be exempted from the lockdown. I think what these guidelines do is to reiterate this earlier principle that the field work on the ground, the farm work, the mandi work, the agricultural produce committees, mandis, their work should go unimpeded. I think that's a reiteration and a sort of clarification. The new element in the guidelines announced on April 15th is the norms for the plantation sector, norms for the fisheries sector, and the norms for animal husbandry sector. But remember, even in the fisheries, the animal husbandry, which is largely poultry, and the plantation sector, the restrictions are that the 50% cap on the number of employees to be employed, that has been retained. So therefore, the big message from these guidelines as far as India's farm sector is concerned, which employs almost 2/3 of India's total population, is that the plantations, animal husbandry and fisheries get some sort of a relaxation to resume their operations, which had got halted in the last 3 weeks.
What role do you think will states play now, especially as they had left the lockdown decision to the center?
I think the states have been given 3 specific powers in my view. These powers were already there, but the guidelines make it very clear. The first responsibility that lies with the states is that they have been given a specific responsibility or the mandate to enforce social distancing in offices when they reopen, and also in workplaces and in factories, in establishments. So the states have been told that it will be your responsibility to make sure that social distancing norms by the use of masks or whatever manner will be the state government. Then number 2 is that the states have been specifically told that no norm under the Disaster Management Act of 2005 should be allowed to be diluted at any level. And number 3 is that states have been given the power and the mandate, so to say, through these guidelines, that if they think that stricter norms need to be imposed in certain places, the states, the state enforcement agencies can impose those norms.
So is there any relaxation for the financial sector as well?
You see, the banks were already exempted under the lockdown norms when they were enforced from the night of 24th of March. The RBI, the payment mechanism, they were all allowed to function. The ATMs were functioning. The banks had introduced new working hours depending on their availability of manpower and the customer base. Now what has been done is that the banks have been told that you get back to your normal working hours. I think that, to my mind, is an important change, an important relaxation in the restriction, that from 20th April, in zones which are not the hotspots, the banks will be required to operate as normally within those working hours limits as the RBI had enforced. Similarly, the SEBI or the insurance regulator, their work will now be continuing they can now function without any restrictions from 20th April, provided their offices do not fall under those zones.
How will the e-commerce sector and the gig economy function in the second phase of the lockdown?
I think there's a big relief for the e-commerce segment at a time when physical retail is not functioning, and physical retail probably runs the risk of violating the norms of social distancing. So therefore, what the government has done is that in those areas which are not hotspots, and from 20th of April, e-commerce activities will be resumed, and people can place orders, and e-commerce companies can service those orders. In other words, the e-commerce riders, home delivery of goods of all kinds can be supplied by the e-commerce companies, and the manner in which the e-commerce companies have gradually increased their shares, I would imagine that more and more physical retail companies will open an e-commerce wing, and they have already done that most probably, and take advantage of this facility for at least the next 3 weeks, so that they don't lose out on the business opportunities that exist in a situation like this. But in the gig economy, the issue is whether the aggregator business, which is the ride-sharing business, they have not been exempted from the relaxation norms. Even after 20th of April, the ride-sharing companies like Uber and Ola, they are not exempted because they have been treated as part of the public transportation network, like the railways, like the airlines, like the bus services, public transportation services in various states and cities and towns. The ride-sharing companies are also part of this national lockdown, which will continue to remain in force. So therefore, while the gig economy, a large part of the gig economy, has not got any benefit from these relaxed guidelines, but the e-commerce segment, which includes companies like Zomato or Swiggy, grocers, which thrive on the principle of home delivery services of goods, they will benefit because they don't use public transport, they use private transport. Their riders can use whether the food or whether it is some article or some good that you are ordered for, and they can be delivered.
A little while ago, you mentioned the rural economy. How are these new guidelines going to make an impact on the rural economy?
Well, I think first is that a large number, the plantation companies, animal husbandry outfits, then you have fisheries, they will be able to take advantage of the relaxed guidelines. So I do see that the rural economy benefit from that. But the bigger benefit will come from the relaxation that these guidelines propose from 20th April for any industrial unit or any office that are located in a rural area. Now, if a manufacturing unit is located in a rural area, then up to 50% of their workforce they can operate, which means 50% of their workers can come, and those units can start operating. I do feel that the rural economy will get a lot of benefit, and they will also benefit from the special dispensation that has been created for units under special economic zones. Now, in a special economic zone, there is an access control system that operates, that anybody who wants to get in there or get out there has to go through a monitoring system. Now, whenever a company wants to get their people from any village or any town to work there, now through that access control system, it will be easy to monitor. So all SEZ units have been allowed to function normally, and these SEZs are mostly surrounded by rural areas. So there will be a spin-off benefits for the rural economy around these SEZs, around these industrial units, around many of these companies that are largely located in rural belt.
There is some confusion about government services. So will all government offices start functioning now?
I think the government offices directive is quite interesting. Earlier, it was not very clear that up to what level of officers will have to attend their workplace as a matter of routine. Now it has been made clear that any officer up to the rank of deputy secretary must come to office. And anybody below that, 33% of those staff will have to be brought to the office. Now, how that will work out, up to the deputy secretary level, I can understand that the government system can provide the government transport to fetch them. But to what extent the staff below deputy secretary level, up to 33% of the workforce, that will be operated is not very clear, because remember that public transportation system is not being resumed. So therefore, if you don't have your own transport, if you don't have your own vehicle, then you cannot attend those offices. But the guidelines clearly say that up to the deputy secretary level, everybody has to attend offices without fail, and 33% of people who are below the deputy secretary level can actually have to come to office, maybe alternately. So therefore, some transportation arrangements will have to be made. While the public transportation system is not being resumed, at least for this period, I do see a tremendous demand for private transport companies to offer their services. That demand will be probably something that will take place in this period.
So if you were to sum it up, what do the MHA guidelines actually mean?
Well, I think they paved the way for a gradual return to normal economic activity after ensuring that caution is not thrown to the wind, after ensuring that whatever gains the national lockdown may have secured for the nation in terms of a check on the spread of the coronavirus disease, those gains are not lost, and therefore the relaxation of the lockdown is gradual, is phased. Remember, the lockdown effect will continue as long as public transport is not resumed. The overall impact of lockdown on the economy will continue as long as all kinds of shopping complexes, malls continue to work under those guidelines, because there is no relaxation for shops or malls to open up. 3rd of May will be an important day, because if the disease does not spread further, probably one has to see in what way the government relaxes these lockdown guidelines, in what manner and how.
Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another deep dive with AGRI. As India stays locked down, Business Standard is providing free access to its premium content for a month on businessstandard.com. Check the link given in the description to claim your free subscription. Do follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram for more.